We're going to finish up with SmartArt by talking about formatting the SmartArt. We're going to look at editing the text, formatting the graphic, formatting the shapes independent of the graphic. We'll look at the properties, that's important. We're going to insert some images into some picture SmartArt, and we'll look at the special case of the organization chart. So I have a worksheet with sort of a bunch of stuff set up about formatting the SmartArt. I'm going to select one of the SmartArt graphics that I have here and show you a couple of the options that you have for formatting the text. You can select the text and we get a ghost image of what is the mini toolbar, which gives you a lot of text editing options. Those text editing options are basically the same options you have in the font group and the alignment group on the Home tab. And lastly, on the Format tab of the SmartArt tools, there's text editing options that include word art. Word art is going to be covered in another movie, so that's for another time. Left click off of that. So those are the text editing options. We can also format the graphic independent of the shapes. And to do that, left click the graphic, and you need to make sure that you don't left click a shape at the same time. Right click to get the shortcut menu. And we have several options on here that are actually on the Design tab. Change layout. That'll pull up the Choose a SmartArt graphic dialog box, so we can change to any other layout that we want to. Right clicking again to get the shortcut menu. We can hide the text pane like we could on the Design tab, and when we do that and open this up again, we'll get the option to redisplay the text pane. The grouping functionality we're going to cover in another movie as well, because there are 6 toolbars that utilize this functionality for all sorts of objects: pivot tables, charts, slicers, etc. The hyperlink and assign macro you'll find on not only the graphic but the individual shapes. And I'll show you what you can do with hyperlinks when we talk about formatting the shapes in a second. And the macros we're going to cover in a series of other movies. We have the option to reset the graphic, which is always nice. We have the ability, as in the Design tab, to convert to shapes. And the last two choices, the size and properties and the format object, when you left click either one of those, you're going to get the Format Shape dialog box, and I've got a picture of this displayed in the upper right hand corner. This dialog box gives you granular control over every single setting that will affect the appearance of the graphic or the pictures. The Format tab, which we're going to look at in a second, is really a series of presets, which are settings that can be changed by using this Format Shape dialog box. I'm going to close that. The choices available on the Format tab for the graphic come down to these. You can change the background color. As I hover over this, we get a preview. We can add a picture to the background. We can add a gradient to the background, and sometimes that can create an interesting effect. And we can add a texture to the background. We can also change the border or add a border and determine its weight, its style. Left click. And the shape effects actually have to do with the shapes, which we're going to talk about in a second. The next thing we're going to do is talk about formatting the shapes. Again, once you select one, you can right click to get the shortcut menu, which looks a little bit different than it does for the graphic. We have text editing functionality. We can hover over change shape and have displayed for us the entire gallery of all the shapes that we have available to us. So we have the ability to change any shape in the graphic to any shape that's displayed in this gallery. We can also add a shape, and this is design functionality once again. So in general, the Design tab allows you to establish the graphic, apply colors, and apply a style. But while you're formatting, you also have the ability to change the structure that you used the Design tab to build. And hyperlinks. I can set a hyperlink up to this shape so that when I click it, I go to either a web page, a place in the document, or I can create a new document with a hyperlink, or I can call up an email program. But what's kind of cool about blending the hyperlink functionality with the SmartArt is that you can use the SmartArt as a navigation tool within a workbook, and I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to cancel that. We're in a spreadsheet that's available on the site that does some analysis for capital projects. And the navigation functionality is a smart art graphic. And what I did, and it's not difficult to do any of this, is to set up a hyperlink to each one of these shapes in the smart art, so that when I left click the graphic, I go to that worksheet that's described on the shape. Going back to the beginning. So there's some cool things you can do with smart art. Back to the worksheet for the movie. The next option is to reset the shape, which will give it its original appearance before you did anything to it. And the size and properties and format shape, left clicking those will get us that format shape dialog box. And then we also have the format tab, which is part of the smart tools. And when we select a shape, we have the option to change shape styles, which is really the shape color more than anything else. We can change the fill color. We can change the outline and put a border. We have all kinds of choices about the weight, the style of the border. We can actually get more colors if the colors shown aren't enough for us. And we have a bunch of shape effects. And this again, these are the presets that I was talking about earlier. The first category is presets, but really all the rest of them are also presets. And when you hover over, you get a flyout menu, and when you hover over any one of these, you get a preview of what it's going to look like. So you get shadow choices. Some of them are fairly subtle. There's reflections. And we're going to talk about how these are applied in a second. Some glow around the shape. You can soften up the edges. You can add a bevel and give some dimension and depth to the shape. And you can rotate the shape as well. Now, I only have one shape selected. If I had them all selected, these changes that I'm getting a preview of would apply to all of the shapes. I'm going to left click off of that. And these presets I have listed here. So if you've got a fairly large graphic, you don't have to independently select every single graphic, I'm holding down the control key, necessarily to change all of the shapes in the graphic. You can select the entire graphic, and when you do that, you can apply the presets, which are bevel and 3D effects really, or you can independently manipulate the bevel and the 3D rotation effects. And there's only one of these formatting options that applies to the graphic in its entirety, and also the shapes if you select the shapes, and that's reflection. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I've got the graphic selected. I'm going to drop down and choose reflection, and we get a preset at the bottom of the screen. You can see what that's going to do. It's going to have a reflection showing below the graphic. I'm going to left click off of that. The next two command groups, Word Art Styles and Arrange, we're going to cover in other movies, as I mentioned. And the last group, Size, allows you to use the spin button to change the size of one or the other dimension of the shape of the graphic or the shape of the shape. And once again, these adjustments apply to the shape that you've selected, so you can independently change one shape or several shapes. You don't have to change all of them unless you select all of the shapes, holding down the control key, and then change the dimensions of the shape. And sometimes that works out better than other times. I'm going to right click and reset the graphic. There's some formatting functionality that you probably need to be aware of when you're dealing with the graphic, or any object actually. I'm going to call up the Format Shape dialog box, and that is the properties. By default, the first property is selected, Move and Size with Cells. Now what does that do? It does this. If I change the width of a column or hide the columns, my graphic shrinks down. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Many times that's not what you want. You spend a lot of time fixing up this graphic, you got it the way you want it to look, and then you start resizing things around it, the rows and the columns, and you lose the entire look of the graphic. So I'm going to select the graphic again and set it so that your graphic will move when you insert columns, but it won't resize. So if I hide these columns again, my graphic doesn't change its size. I'm going to Control Z, and if I insert some columns over here, the graphic will move to the right. I'm going to Control Z to undo that, or selecting the graphic once again, you can have it not move or resize with the cells. So then when I insert some columns, the graphic stays put. The smart art that allows you to insert pictures or images is fairly cool. If I left click this, I go to the place where my pictures are stored by default, and I can choose a picture and insert it. And the picture is automatically cropped around the dimensions of the shape. In this case, it's a circle. And just that quickly and easily, you can insert pictures into your smart art. And once you do, we get the Picture Tools Format tab, which we'll talk about in another movie when we cover pictures. And lastly, we're going to talk about the organization chart, which is a special case of a hierarchy graphic. And I say it's a special case because there are options you have with the org chart that you don't have with other graphics. And they are found on the Design tab. When I add a shape, I can add an assistant. And you may have noticed in the prior movie that that was there. I never talked about it. But when I left click that, I now have Bob as an assistant and some unnamed person. You also have the option, and again, I didn't talk about this. You may have noticed it was grayed out when we were talking about the other graphics in the prior movie. We have 4 different options for the structure of the organization chart. We can have the standard view, which is what we're currently looking at. We can have the branches stem off of a line that drops down and have both sides showing, or we can show the relationships to the left off of the line, the main line, or to the right, and you see the little images below. There's also an option to have an org chart that adds images, so you can have pictures of the folks that make up the org chart. So that's formatting the smart art. We looked at ways to format the text by calling up the mini toolbar, by utilizing the commands in the font group and the alignment group on the Home tab. We also have some other options on the Format tab. We looked at formatting the graphic in its entirety by right-clicking and getting the shortcut menu, where we had some options that were available on the Design tab, including resetting the graphic. Formatting the shape was similar. We had a shortcut menu, options that were available that are also on the Design tab, and presets that are available on the Format tab. We took a look at properties that need to be set and addressed, otherwise you can get some unpleasant side effects when you're adjusting the sizing of your columns and rows. We inserted some images into a picture graphic, and we took a look at the organization chart.